Hi, everybody. This is our first in a series that we're going to do about media and crime and true crime, looking at it through a communication lens. And we're going to talk today about mass society theory, which is one of the first theories that we developed about communication. So, mass society theory did not emerge from careful scientific neutral observation. It really emerged from a place of anxiety and fear. So here's what was happening when we came up with this theory. It was the late 19th, early 20th century, back when dinosaurs rolled into the earth. So think like 1890s all the way through to the 1920s. We might be able to push it into the 30s. And there's a legacy that this theory has left, even in the true crime that we see today. So what happened is we had rapid industrialization. So you had people who used to live in the country who had moved into cities for job opportunities. And so urban crowding was starting to happen. You were starting to have situations where you had crowds. You have a huge influx of immigration. This is when we had Ellis Island and everyone filtered through New York and they would land in urban centers. And this mix of people from rural areas moving to urban areas added to the immigration and cultural change created a situation where traditional community structures were no longer what they used to be. You know, your small town and the elders in your small town were no longer a thing once you moved to the city. So you had the collapse of a lot of what people depended on society for. And you have these new mass media forms that suddenly came to light. You have newspapers that are coming to popularity. They'd been a thing. And then added to that was radio. And the new technology of the time was cinema or film. And you would go to the cinema and you would watch a movie. And before the cinema, there would be little advertisements, maybe updates on the war, and propaganda was definitely a thing. And big institutions and people who control a lot of things, the Illuminati of the time, they were asking questions like, how do we control this and make sure people don't panic and sort of turn on us? So mass society theory reflects this fear of the masses. It does not include a trust in the public and their ability to make meaning of what's happening in their world. So the audience, well, this theory in general is where empathy goes to die. And empathy is what we're focused on this week. So in this theory, the audience, which is you and I, if we're watching a movie, reading a newspaper, or listening to a radio broadcast, are seen as irrational. So like little, blobs that are governed by our emotions. Our emotions are very reactive. We're highly suggestible. We don't have critical thinking skills. We need someone to tell us what to think about these things that are happening in our society. And we're also seen as being very vulnerable to manipulation. So people or the audience are not seen as meaning makers. We're just receivers. And at the time, the conception that was used was a syringe. They believe that they would fill the syringe with what they want you to know and inject it into you. It's a pretty simple theory, right? Overly simple. That's why it doesn't really work. Because it really strips the audience of agency and the ability to make their own meaning. And so there was an assumption, if we show you violence, you'll be violent. If we show you fear, there's going to be a mass panic. If we, show you these things, oh my gosh. And so media was seen as direct, powerful, and emotionally overwhelming. And so a lot of times this theory is called the hypodermic needle model or the magic bullet, right? Media sends you a message, you ingest it, end of story. Now we've solved all of our problems. So that never works out. So why does true crime fit so well, and how was true crime treated at the time? There were true crime reporting happening, and it really centered on fear, moral outrage, emotional contagion, and crowd reactions. Not a great way to start critical thinking, right? And crime itself, true crime reporting became a social control tool also, because if I can get you to read a story I've written that emphasizes danger, deviance from social norms, and it has a threat alongside it, then I am reinforcing the norms, right? Social norms. I'm warning the public in a way so I can hide behind I'm just letting everyone know, sort of like righteousness. But I'm also identifying outsiders that are outside of our cultural norms, which makes you want to conform and be part of the good people, good society, right? And so what this theory actually did was it created really powerful monster narratives. So that's the husky. So under mass society theory, complexity is dangerous, context is going to weaken control, and empathy is a huge disruptor to order. So at this time, true crime media leaned really heavy to simple black and white thinking. There is no gray. Simplified villains, simplified victims. Your villain is all bad, black hat. Your victim is all good, wonderful, no flaw in them. And there's a certain moral certainty that pure as the driven snow. It's comfortable for us to have a villain who wears a black hat and is all evil, because then we don't have to look at ourselves. And, if you've read Frankenstein, if you've gone through American Gothic literature or even British literature, you've learned that anytime we start making people into monsters, we learn a quick lesson, which is we actually are the monsters and they're not so much. So it tells us what to think, and it tells us when to stop thinking, all of which I don't recommend. So it gets a lot of things wrong about people. People are not passive. Audiences are not passive. Audiences interpret things differently. They make meaning from what they take, and media effects are not uniform on people. But what it does get right, and what it does show us, is how fear, when it's conceptualized through media, it narrows our thinking. It makes us much more black and white. Repetition is going to shape perception. The emotional framing of a crime piece really matters, and that media really can amplify anxiety and fear. The problem is when we don't notice that influence. So in this course, I want you to notice when these things happen. And on a personal level, if you're ever in a personal situation where you find your thinking narrowing and repetition is being used and emotional framing is being used on you, you should throw up a yellow flag in your brain, at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag. So you can't remove the complexity of a story without removing the humanity of the story. Whenever people are like, I just want to get down to the message I want to send, what you're basically saying is you'd like to remove all the humans out of the way, which doesn't work in communication because it's a human thing we're doing, right? So you're going to see the legacy of this theory when you are watching documentaries that avoid nuance, that prioritize shock value. We have the whole if it leads, it bleeds kind of thing going on. When you see mental illness being framed as danger, that should give you a pretty big idea that you're viewing some legacy here. When you see mothers or women in general who are framed as either saints or monsters without much in between, you're probably dealing with some narrow thinking. And when you are left at the end of a piece of either written or visual media, when you're left with this sense of certainty, that should be a red flag. You should really